Alright, Diablo 4 players, so today we're going to be talking about how to survive the hardest difficulty in the game, specifically Tormented 4, and maybe you want to do those Pit 150s. So for starters, we have to go ahead and actually explain a lot of different things. There was actually a post over here not too long ago on Reddit. It was talking about this guy saying, dude, Torment 4 is impossible, and I don't know why, and he wanted some help. I'm here to help this guy, and you basically never die in Diablo 4, which is actually quite realistic, as this game is a lot easier than other action RPGs as long as you know exactly what to get. So for starters, one of the most important things to mention is as you go up in the difficulty, you will have negative resistances and negative armor. It will apply these on your character. But what you need to make sure that you do is check your character's stat sheet, and that can be opened up by showing off the stats in your character. So to kind of see how this looks like in game, you would open up your inventory and then you click where it says stats and materials, and you'll scroll down, you'll see the resistances, you'll see the other forms of defenses here. But specifically, I want to focus in on making sure first off that your armor and your resistances are at specifically 70% for all of the resistances, and then for armor it needs to be minimum at 1,000. Armor is by far the most important thing to actually hit. You actually need maximum life too, but we'll talk more about that, as there isn't like a maximum cap. Another thing to mention, once you get 1,000 armor, do not go above that. Like in terms of like, if you go above it, because let's say you're playing Barbarian and strength gives you armor and resistances will give are given by getting more intelligence. The thing is that once you are at that number, it can not go any higher. There are ways to get maximum resistances, but for the most part, you're going to be at a minimum of 70 to really become tanky. And then we'll talk more about maximum life in a moment. But you want to make sure that you try to hit these numbers if you are trying to survive in the game. And again, going above 70% isn't going to work unless you have plus maximum resistances. And then with the armor, there's nothing that you need to get to go over 1,000. There was originally some dungeon modifier that would remove 20% of your armor, but that no longer exists. So once you're at 1,000 armor, that's it. But one thing to mention that is very important, make sure that your character, when you're checking for these numbers, okay, the most important thing that a lot of players make a mistake on is they do not select the torment difficulty, and they're not in that torment for like the world. So they're playing in penitent and they're like, well, my armor is at 1,000, I'm gonna go to T4, and they forget you need to open up, okay, this is very important, you open up this stat sheet, okay, in Torment 4. That's one of the key things over here. So you're gonna be trying to get maximum resistances, and ideally, again, you get 70%. There's a plus increase to maximum resistances. You can go even higher, but for the most part, it's kind of like on very special pieces of gear, and we'll talk about that. But you want to make sure that this is max as well. Now, where can you actually get these two stats? These are given by your gear as well as your Paragon board. Some things on the tree, like on your passive tree, depending on the class that you play, those could be relevant, but for the most part, you're going to be getting most of these from your gear, Paragon board, and your jewels. Now, as far as life goes, because I was reading this guy's post over here, and the main problem this guy had, he's like, yeah, I'm armor capped, I'm res capped, but he only had a 2,000 life, and that is where this number is very fuzzy in Diablo 4, as in, well, you definitely want to have more HP, but you can have a 10k life HP build, and it could be actually tankier than a 20k life build because you have barrier, you have fortification, you have all these other sources of damage reduction. But I would say in terms of like a number stat, because I'm trying to solve this for you guys, but there isn't like a finite number that you need in terms of life. However, I would say that 20k life would be near the high end, and 10,000 life would be towards the lower end in terms of like an end game build. Keep in mind, I'm not saying like once you hit level 60 you have this, but once you're at Paragon like 200-ish, you should try to think about the number on your HP to be in around this area, at least 10k around there. Again, you could be at like 7k, whatever, 8k, but around 10k-ish would be towards the lower end. And for some builds that would want to do overpower because it does give you more damage, then you do want even more HP because it does also give you more damage. Now, a lot of this life is going to be gained on your tree, the gear, your Paragon board, and I'll show you guys all these in a second. But think about your HP to be around these sort of numbers. You also want lots of damage reduction. So this could be acquired by a lot of different areas, Paragon board, some of your items, your skill tree, and then also your aspects. So there are certain aspects that you can put on a character that could be like you get 20% damage after using a basic skill, or like you have some damage reduction if you have a companion, or these other things. Another thing that I want to mention with the damage reduction, it is much better to have one source of 50% damage reduction than two separate sources of damage reduction at 25%. The reason why is damage reduction works by what's called inverse multiplicative. I won't go too far into it, but basically just realize that one source of a big number is better than a bunch of tiny sources that would add up to the same number because it separates them. And then another source of survivability actually is your movement speed. This is a huge area where it's going to improve your speed on just clearing out content, but also your survivability when you're fighting, let's say, Lilith or any of these shadow things that come out during the pit at the very end, right? Those shadow things, these can hit you for crazy, crazy amounts of damage, and you start to build up these stacks. Once you're at 3 stacks, these can absolutely obliterate you. So technically there are ways to remove those, but for the most part, movement speed will really help out. You actually have to dodge certain things in the game, and movement speed is going to be key. And then also I want to mention, don't forget your potions and incenses. This could be a great source. But now that we know a bunch of different ways to kind of help out with survivability, I want to show you guys kind of more real examples. But if you open up your stat sheet over here, as far as damage reduction goes, this one is kind of dependent on the class because not every class is going to have the ability to become fortified. You're not going to be able to gain barrier. Dodge chance is actually a pretty good stat as well. You may not want to get too many pieces of gear with dodge because there are some stats where dodge gets also inverse multiplicative, but there are some things like when you temper that don't affect it as much. Keep in mind, sometimes Diablo has updated dodge a lot, but to get 100% dodge, it is very, very difficult. Don't try to shoot for that much, but having a couple things on the Paragon to get some extra dodge can actually be pretty helpful because you just take no damage. But there are other ways that you can increase your survivability. I want to kind of show you guys examples. This is just a Paragon board. There are tons of different classes in the game, but do not skip out on these nodes, especially that give you maximum life. I know sometimes you might think, oh man, I really want this like 15% damage or the 10% damage that's here or there. These small numbers are all going to be additive damage numbers, so it's much more important that you actually have the ability to survive. You can always get more damage later, but if you're constantly dying, that's going to really hinder your progression. So getting all these small HP nodes are actually really key, but also there's a lot of these yellow nodes. You can see this one over here, and I know it's in red because it's showing that I don't have the requirements met. Different websites have different ways that they calculate this, but like in game, I will have this met. And depending on the order of your Paragon board, this number goes up higher and higher depending on which area that you place the board on. Basically, the first board, these are you're going to hit, like it doesn't matter. But on the second board over here, this number, if this was on the 5th board, this number of the requirement would be way, way higher. But I will have this actually reached in my build, so you can see where it says damage reduction while fortified, and there's also fortified generation. Now there's another bonus 6% damage reduction if I reach that willpower. So depending on the class that you play, you may want to factor in, well, can I reach this node? Do I have a bunch of pieces of gear that have all set? There's a lot of these that will give you some sort of damage reduction. Now again, most of these are going to be on a condition. It could be damage reduction from close, could be far, could be depending on the condition. It could be close, again, far, and maybe your character is a ranged character, so you want to play at range, so it's going to be better to get like damage reduction from distance targets versus, let's say, close. Again, this is something that you'll have to factor in as well. And then another thing I want to mention, because I want to make this for specifically Season 7, Season 7 actually has a lot of powers that are great for survivability. There's also the brand new occult gems. So for Season 7 in particular, we're looking at things like the Witchcraft powers. We have the Vengeful Spirit to basically absorb damage for you. There's also the Aura of Siphoning. This allows you to recover HP. You can also get Healing Received as one of the stats on your Paragon board or other pieces of gear. But this is going to give you 1% of your maximum life each time that you are dealing damage with it. So it does damage and applies poison, which could give you a bonus. Maybe you have damage reduction from a poison enemy. That was a stat that like existed a long time ago. But not every class can make great use out of every single one of these. But for the most part, this is a pretty nice thing to have as well. Again, for survivability, there's also Twilight Warding. That's going to give you a barrier. Again, this is all for Season 7, but when Season 8 comes out, we'll make like an updated one because I think it's relevant. There's also Aura of Misfortune. This allows the enemies that are nearest to have their attacks interrupted. So that if they're like swinging swinging something at you, oh, they get interrupted, so they don't hit you. But on top of that, it's going to slow the enemies down by 30%, which is great because sometimes you have damage reduction from, let's say, crowd-controlled enemies, or basically slowing them down is obviously going to make them hit you less, right? And there's also other ways that you can get some sort of survivability. Having extra minions just that exist that can be attacked can actually help out with survivability, but there's also ways where certain enemies can be displaced. Maybe you're activating a skill and it's going to group up all the enemies, it's going to vacuum them in. So if they're close to you, it's going to push them away, or whatever the case may be. Like the frog will grab the enemy, right? If he's getting grabbed, he will essentially not be able to attack you depending on the location. Also, another important thing to mention is getting a lot of main stat is actually very good for a lot of different builds. It gives you survivability in some sort of a way, whether it's giving you armor or extra like healing received. There's a lot of other things that go into your main stat. It depends on the class that you play, but like resistances can be tied to intelligence for some character classes. The main stat depends on the class that you are playing. Mostly, like if you're playing Barb, you're going to get way more strength, which is going to give you more armor. But if you're playing something like Necromancer or the Sorc, well, you're going to get more intelligence, so that's going to give you more resistances. So keep that in mind as well while you are building your character. Another thing I want to mention is don't forget out on the Mercenary system. The Mercenary system is a great way where you can increase your survivability or damage. I do have a guide. I'm just going to link this one down below. It goes over all of the best mercenaries and how you would utilize them and what are the strengths of each one. And also, don't forget to pop your instances. If you're like, man, I'm like 10 resistance off, I'd have to swap out this whole piece of gear, or I'd have to re-masterwork a different like thing and get a crit on it. Keep in mind, masterworking is always great. Tempering, you can get a lot of survivability there as well. But yeah, do not forget about that at all. But I want to go ahead and also add this part to the video, which I think is kind of one really cool thing, that I want to show you directly areas that you can get huge amounts of survivability. So let's hop into it. So first off, there are mythic uniques that are very good. Keep in mind, you don't have to have these, but like I'm just showing you guys examples of here. This could basically solve your armor. It's giving you a bunch of max life. I mean, the guy said he had like 2,000 HP, that it was having a problem. Remember, he's like, I have 2,800 HP. If I go to this right here, this helmet alone almost is his entire build. And keep in mind, giving that damage reduction is really good. Getting ranks to skills. Some of the skills will either last longer, it's going to have a shorter cooldown, or it's going to give you more barrier, or whatever the case may be in your build. So don't forget, skill ranks can help out. Also, your runes and rune words, you can maybe get like the barrier generated or certain active abilities from other classes that can also give you damage reduction, which will give you more survivability, or generate barrier or fortification or any of these things, which is great. So I mentioned before there was maximum resistance. That is how you can beat the cap of 70%, and you can go even further beyond. But like getting Tyrael's Might, if you want to become the tankiest character, this is like your golden ticket right here. And keep in mind, you don't always have to use this. It's really great when you just hop into Torment 4 to max out your resistances and specifically armor. Armor is no doubt the best way to actually keep up your survivability, but resistance is something that it's kind of something I would say later on. Ideally you want to max it, but you can get resistances on a lot of pieces of gear, but specifically Tyrael's will just solve everything instantly, and then Harlequin will solve all your armor. These are like, again, the two items that just solve one stat completely. There's also a lot of uniques that have been buffed. Some are for certain classes. I wanted to go over the ones that all classes can use for the video, so it's not too long. But there are a lot of uniques that have been buffed that give you maybe resistances or a bunch of armor. There's a lot of druid stuff that gives you a lot of armor now. But Tass's the Dawning Sky is not bad at all. It's going to give you that maximum resistance. It's going to give you movement speed, all stats. These are all great things to have. But it's specifically like resistances, like one piece of gear to solve all your resistance problems is huge. But there's a lot of aspects, again, that if you use like a basic attack, you get like 20% damage reduction. Do not forget about defensive aspects. I know the whole goal in Diablo is usually smash as much damage into your build as possible. When you're looking at builds on websites, they all go for damage, right? And it's because they have enough Paragon points to get all of this like plus maximum life, damage reduction based on a condition. Another great area that you can get a lot of resistances in is going to be Rachnoth's Wake. There's also Yen's Blessing. Those are two unique boots that basically solve all of your resistance problems instantly. Getting a GA1 is pretty easy to obtain as well. And then we also have the Amulet. Amulets, you can also temper on things, but Amulet technically can give you movement speed, and give you max life. You can actually temper life on your pieces of gear. Usually though, I'm going to be real with you guys, most of the time with the amulets, you're looking for a bunch of the passives that would give you a damage multiplier, but if you're really struggling, this is another area where you can get it. Keep in mind, getting the high item power will also give you a bunch of resistances on the implicit. Same thing with the rings as well, but rings, a lot of times you want to try to get like, let's say crit, let's say maximum life, and then maybe another stat. Maybe you can scale vulnerable damage or something like that, or damage to close. You can temper on some of those other things, but don't skip out on maximum life on your rings. It's really great. And then also your weapons, trying to get a GA max life or your main stat is a very good thing to get. But I mean, on a two-handed, look at this. This is 2,400. That's the guy's entire build right there in just that one item. So hopefully this guide helped you guys out and you will be able to survive Torment 4 and basically become almost immortal in Diablo 4. The game has gotten a lot easier and I would say beginner friendly. So don't be discouraged earlier on if you are dying. Just try to get those resistances. Again, going over this thing over here, make sure that these are finished, okay? Then the next step is to get as much HP as like kind of possible, and then also getting damage reduction. I would say at least about 50% in total. Again, I know a lot of these will be on some conditional effect, so try to get about that amount and your build will play a lot smoother. But that's gonna wrap things up. If you guys enjoyed the video, drop a like on it. If you're new here and want to see more videos that are informational and important in the future, hit subscribe to that bell and I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out.